Baruch Hashem Yahweh. Well, what a blessing to be here. What I hope to do over the next 2 or 3 days is speak to you through the words of the prophet Hosea. So Hosea, the book of Hosea is going to be our template. And then we're going to go from there and jump into some current events, because I really believe that Yahweh's Moedim, his feasts and festivals, are Mikra Kodesh. They are holy rehearsals for us. And we live in an age where we really need to extract ourselves from the world, come together in community, and prepare for the days ahead. That's one of the reasons that I love Sukkot, and so many have come to the feast site, because we are preparing in our hearts, in our ways, and in our lives how to migrate out of this world. So Hosea, when we go and turn to the book of Hosea, we're going to understand that he communicated to a society which is similar to our society. Hosea, through his personal experiences, he illustrated a prophetic message throughout his personal experiences. And we have to understand that he was communicating in about 750 before the Common Era to the 10 northern tribes, or the house of Israel. The house of Israel was just about to go down the drain. They were just about to be carried away captive. The society that Israel knew was about to come to the end. We are Israel. We are in the exile because of the disobedience in 722 before the Common Era. We've been scattered to the nations. And now we live in a nation that I believe is in the prophetic same place that Hosea spoke to Israel back in 750 of the Common Era, before the Common Era. He can speak to Israel, you and I today, because we are in the same predicament as the house of Israel then. We are about to go down the drain. The culture that we live in is in the last few swirls before it goes down the drain, and there is a judgment coming. So Hosea's voice will echo forward from that day to this day, because I believe that is why he is a Navi, a prophet, and his message is for us today. And that is what is so powerful, because when we look at the book of Hosea, hopefully you've had time to turn there now, it was to the northern tribes. Why? Because they were breaching the covenant. And we live in a society today where the majority of society has no idea of covenant. And the ones that are talking about covenant mainly are talking about a Levitical hierarchy or 19th century covenant theology, that they're just dressing up with Hebraic words, Paleo-Hebrew, but it's 19th century covenant theology, blood covenant theology, suzerain vassal treaties, salt treaties. All of this was covered by the church over 150 years ago, and there's nothing new except they've rebranded it with a little bit of temple, with a little bit of Hebrew language, and a bit of paleo to throw most of you off. But I've got those books on my bookshelf. They're old. There's nothing new, because there's no new personal revelation by the Ruach. We need to understand that the covenant that is being spoken to this generation is Israel in exile, and it is because we've appointed one head, which is the Melchizedek, that is going to bring his people into safety. They were in a state, Israel, at the time that Hosea was speaking to them, they were in a state of political and social decline. Do you think that we're in a time similar to that? We are. We're getting ready for the elections. We are in a time never before where there is social and political decline. So the parallelisms of the prophetic message that Hosea is going to speak, I believe, are so powerful. That's why I want to spend time on this today. Because what there was is, even at the time of Hosea, those in leadership, they were at threat from assassination. There were 6 kings. 4 of them were assassinated. We have threats right now. Is Donald going to make it to the elections here in a few weeks? We don't know. We're living with the same threats as 10 Israel was living whilst they were in the nation before exile. Well, now we're in exile and we're hoping for the reverse, the king that we've appointed as our head to return us back to the land. Do you see? This is full circle. So Hoshea's message, the word of Yahweh, the Navi, is alive today, speaking to us if we have the ears and the eyes to see what's written in this book. And it is powerful. So it's going to be different for me. This is a stretch for me, you have to understand, because those of you that have listened to my teaching of the book of Hebrews or Yaakov or the epistles of Yochanan that we've gone through, I go through very methodically, and I go through in the context of the culture, and I spend all this time with an introduction. We've only got 3 days. We're at Sukkot. I'm not going to be doing a bunch of PowerPoint. I'm just going to go and share this from what I see, and my purpose is not to extrapolate every single piece of historical information, because this is multi-level prophecy, and I am not going to speak about what Hosea was prophesying 750 before the Common Era. I can't move because we've only got one camera. Oh, blast! I'm not going to be speaking to 750 before the Common Era. That you can do in your own time. We don't have the time, but we have to hear the prophetic message that he is speaking to Israel in exile today, because it is what we are facing, and that's why we're here at the feast site. So, what was happening? Well, the Ephraimites, 10 Israel, they had made an allegiance with the Syrians. And I believe most of us, Israel in exile, we see what's going on in Syria, and we see that the globalists and the New World Order, that they're pounding Syria with bombs. Why? Because they're still trying to be independent from the globalists. And you and I as Israel, we would make an allegiance with Syria over the New World Order. I know I would. But Judah, the house of Judah, which to us today we know that they're Ashkenazi Zionists, they make an allegiance with who? The Assyrian. And then the Assyrian is a metaphor for the anti-Mashiach, right? The Assyrian that's going to come down from north. You see, the Zionists, they've made an allegiance with the Assyrians to actually bomb, metaphorically, if you will, in our day, the Syrians. And this is what we're facing. I hope you just caught what I said. Israel in exile today, you and I think we can look and see what they're doing in Syria is a globalist setup, because the Syrians are independent. They're independent from the banksters, and they want to crush them. The reason the New World Order, America, Britain, the globalists, NATO, are going into Syria is because they are backed by the house of Judah, which we know isn't Judah, the Zionist globalist bankers. They've gone with the anti-Mashiach spirit, the Assyrian. So what Hosea was speaking of, it's alive today if you've got the eyes to see. Do you understand what I'm saying right there? This is prophecy, and the word of Yahweh is alive. His scriptures are alive for his people, for his prophets, for us today. So yes, we can see this throughout the introduction and the speaking of Hosea. We had Judah making an allegiance with the Assyrians. And guess what they wanted to do? Because of that, there was the attack on Damascus. We know the prophecy that yet has to be fulfilled is that Damascus is turned to a what? A ruinous, rubberless heap. So is that in our prophetic future? Yes, I believe so. Just as Hosea, the prophet Hosea, recognized in his day. So we really have to be on guard and have a heart to be able to hear the Ruach HaKodesh. Because Israel was in their final phase of history. I believe the United States, I believe the Western world as we know it, is in its final phase of history. The last few swirls before it goes down the drain, before the bankers pull the plug, before they organize an orchestrated collapse of society. And then what are we going to do? Are we going to be prepared? Are we going to go to Yahweh's feast sites? Are we going to be the people that goes out from the nations victoriously in triumph? I believe it. But we have got to be as wise as serpents and as harmless as doves, because what I saw that scared me so much was during the 20th century, the New World Order, the globalists, have been able to use puppets, specific people, to move people, migration of the masses. We have FEMA camps, FEMA regions, thank you, throughout the United States of America. And how do you move populations from one FEMA region into designated FEMA regions? How do you do that? You need a spokesperson that can cause the migration of people. The two biggest spokesmen for migration in the 20th century that could move masses of people, who were they? Stalin, and the one that just again reappeared out of the woodwork. I think we have something for you we're going to play right now. And please, don't sing along. You're going to be tempted to, because I think most of you that are 40 years and older most probably got duped on this one too.
John, Tim.
They want you to buy a minivan so they can ship you to the FEMA region that you really need to go to, crying out.
It is not giving us any sound, John.
It's not giving us any sound. Well, there he is, the greatest people mover of the 20th century, migration. We Are the World, 1984, Band-Aid, Bob Geldof. That man can move people wherever the globalists appoint him to move people. And how many of you donated money to Band-Aid in 1984-85? How many of you were singing those songs? Look at that. Look at that. What a group of people that we have there. I mean, that was a showbiz orgy adorned with such moral and ethical examples. Who did we have in Live Aid? Well, we had the one-worlders, Bob Geldof and Bono. We had the bisexual cocaine addict, David Bowie. We had the transvestite boy, George. And finally, we had the AIDS-infected homosexual, Freddie Mercury, and they got you for about $80 million. What was that all about? What was that all about? And why am I speaking to you now? Because I was astounded just a few months ago when there was a flotilla on the River Thames in London as Britain was coming to the polling stations, and they were about to vote on whether they would throw the thumb at the globalists and Brexit. Would they stay in Europe or would they leave? Nobody seriously thought that they would get the votes to leave. And who was the one that wanted to keep the people in the European Union? Who did they have out? Who did they pull out after 30 years because he's the most successful migrator of the populations, moving them where they need to go? Pawns for the political and globalist agenda, and none other than Bob Geldof comes out on a flotilla on the River Thames in London, and he speaks to the people to stay in the European Union. And what is all this about? As we go into Hosea and we look, and we're going to use Hosea, and we're going to look into Ethiopia, and we're going to see what is going on, because I believe what they did in Ethiopia in 1985 was the globalists' agenda for what they're going to do in the FEMA regions that they have set up in the United States. And what they did in Europe by bringing Bob Geldof out was to bring their man of the hour out again in preparation for raising up and doing the same thing in the United States. They need to move the people where they want you to go. And how do you do that? Famine. Food. You put the food, you put the medicine where you need the people to go, and then you get a spokesman out and you have the biggest migration. Stalin started it in the 20th century, and then we see that now we live in the times where Sabob is being used again to move the people in the world where they need to go. So let's turn now to Hosea chapter 1. The word of Yahweh came to Hosea, the son of Bechi, in the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Asas, and Hezekiah, king of Yehuda, in the days of Jeroboam, the son of Joash, king of Israel. When Yahweh began to speak to Hosea, Yahweh said to Hosea. Notice he didn't speak to Hosea before. There was a point when Yahweh began to speak to the prophet. And with all of you too, you may think, well, I'm not hearing from Yahweh. But there's going to be an inception point where he begins to speak to his people. So you be patient and wait on Yahweh. Go take yourself a wife of harlotry and children of harlotry, for the land has committed a great harlotry. We need to recognize the land that we live in today. We need to recognize the nations that we live in today are at this very same point. Great harlotry. The faith that was once delivered to the saints is now all about fertility Easter rites, Malachian child sacrifice. Even that song, do they know it's Christmas time? Well, they were Ethiopian Christians. Yes, they did. I mean, my goodness. But the nations, we can see the parallelisms. The nation had gone into great harlotry by departing from Yahweh. So he went and took Gomer, the daughter of Diblaim, and she conceived and bore him a son. Then Yahweh said to him, who was the whore, the wife of whoredom? What was her name? Gomer. And who are we talking about right now that is saying that they are Jews but are not, and they are the descendants of who? Gomer. The Ashkenazi are the daughters of Gomer. So again, whoredom, harlotry, those that are saying that they're something but they're not. They have a form of godliness but they deny its very power. Call his name Jezreel. And of course we know that is the valley of Jezreel, or speaking to the end of the age, Armageddon. Armageddon is where Israel lost her battles. So the prophetic message goes forth. For in a little while I will avenge the bloodshed of Jezreel on the house of Jehu, and bring an end to the kingdom of the house of Israel. And we are coming to an end of the kingdoms of men. I really believe that. We are coming to, it just cannot continue to go on with the amount of debt, with the amount of deception, and that people are waking up. Something's going to happen in 6 weeks. I mean, if Hillary gets in, I think there's going to be civil unrest. I don't know, but I expect so. But what happens if Trump gets in? Will there be civil unrest also? But what happens if there's a postponement, a delay? Maybe her throat rots out, and they have to postpone and delay, and Obama stays in. Would there be a civil unrest there? Either way I see it, I think we're heading for some tough times. I really do. I don't see another solution. Maybe you do. But look, and it says, and it shall come to pass in that day that I will break the bow of Israel in the valley of Jezreel. And she conceived again and bore a daughter. Then Elohim said to him, call her name Lo Ruhamah, no compassion. No compassion. For I will no longer have rachamim, mercy, on the house of Israel. There's going to be a time when Yahweh is going to no longer have mercy on this nation, just like he no longer had mercy on Israel, northern Israel. So we can see, but I will utterly take them away. Yes, I will have mercy on the house of Yehudah, and will save them by Yahweh their Elohim. And I will not save them by bow, nor by sword or battle, by horses or horsemen. So is the house of Judah going to be saved by the IDF, by tanks and by infantry? No. So we need to look and see the deception that is before us. No, that cannot be biblical, the mandate of restoration and getting saved. Because salvation comes what? From the strength of man, from the might of man, or is it a supernatural power by Yahweh? He says, no, I'm not going to save them by sword. I'm not going to save them by bow. I'm not going to save them by horse or horseman. Now, when she had weaned Lo Ruhamah, she conceived and bore a son. Then Elohim said, call his name. This speaks to us. This speaks to what? The calling of your name, the Melchizedek priesthood. Well, that's a stretch. How do you get that out of this verse? I'll show you. Call his name Lo Ami, not my people. For you are not my people, and I will not be your Elohim. But now, if you turn to 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 10, you see this mentioned right there. This is speaking into our future. Let's turn right there. 1 Peter, Kepha Aleph, chapter 2, verse 10. Of course, it comes from Hosea, not my people, the royal priesthood, sent into captivity. Israel was sent into captivity. It was such a severe judgment that they didn't even know where they came from. Here we are out in the nation, such a severe judgment on Israel that you thought that you were a Christian. You thought that you were a citizen of the United States until Yahweh revealed the judgment of Israel, the message of restoration of Israel, and he said, no, you're my people. Yes, I scattered you in 722 before the Common Era because of the very same things that are going on today, but now I'm going to gather you. If you appoint for yourself one head, and that head is the Melchizedek. And Kepha knew this. Look at what he says. Kepha Aleph, chapter 2 and verse 10, verse 9. They stumble being disobedient to the word to which they were also appointed. But you are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood. The only priesthood that was kingly, that's royal, that's Malchi in the whole of the scripture was what? Exodus 19:4 to 24:11. It's the Melchizedek priesthood. Show me another priesthood in scripture that's royal, that's kingly, a holy nation. And we can see this is talking about Book of the Covenant Torah to the whole nation that you shall be appointed before me. And he says, a holy nation, his own special people, that you may proclaim the praises of him who called you out of darkness into Torah, out of darkness, right? Into his marvelous light. You once were not a people. He's now speaking prophetically, of course, of Hosea chapter 1, verse 8. The Lo Ami, not my people, but you are now the people of Yahweh, who had not obtained mercy, for now you have obtained lo ami. You obtain mercy. Can you see how Hoshea is not stuck 750 before the Common Era? But what was going on in Israel now, we now have the full return to Israel because of this message of the Melchizedek that's going out and returning her no longer Lo Ruhamah, no longer not my people, the lower me, but you are going to be returned. Look at chapter 1 of Hosea and verse 10. We can see now as Hosea speaks to the nation, yet the number of the children of Israel shall be as the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured or numbered. And it shall come to pass in the place where it was said of them, you are not my people. Where was that? In the nations. In the nations, there it shall be said of them, you are sons of the living Elohim. Now those of you, I don't get into it much anymore, but I used to get into the Hebrew gematria. We can see that phrase, if you look at it in the Hebrew gematria, comes to 153. And what happened when in John, we find in the book of Yochanan that Yahusha told him to cast the net out on the other side of the boat, and then he filled that net with how many fish? 153 fish, symbolizing what? That he was going to, all that he brought in, he was going to catch. He was going to catch you and I and bring us in from the nations. You are the sons of the living Elohim. This is powerful stuff. Cast the net over the other side of the boat. Don't look into the pagan traditions. Don't look into syncretism. You're not going to catch what you need to catch by staying in 21st century institutionalized church. But once you started to cast that net over the other side of the boat, didn't he bring you in? Didn't he bring you in? And hasn't the revelation been amazingly fast, and how quick that he's woken you up to call you back? You are his people, no longer cast off into the nations. This is the point. Then the children of Yehudah and the children of Israel, they shall be gathered together and appoint for themselves one head. That is the Melchizedek Kohen Hagadol. This is the message of restoration. And they shall come up out of the land, for great will be the day of Jezreel. Great will be the day of Yahweh. Great will be the end of the age. Great will be the end of the age. Say to your brethren, my people, and to your sisters, Rachamim, mercy is shown. This is amazing. As we see, as Hosea now goes through and begins to now speak to these people that have been judged, that have been condemned. I see us on the flip side of this, of a people that are being restored out of condemnation and being restored to glory. But we have to appoint one head, but we need to be very wary of the days and of the age that we live in. Look at chapter 2 and verse 2. Bring charges against your mother, bring charges. For she is not my wife, nor am I her husband. We need to bring charges against her too. I mean, it's time for us to wake up against those Judaic traditions. Bring charges, and that's what this ministry has been doing, is bringing charges against the traditions. The Christian traditions of syncretism and paganism, but then you just jumped ship and you started dressing up with Judaism's traditions, and we're bringing charges against that too. Bring charges against the traditions of your mothers, whether it's your institutionalized church mothers or the Judaism's mother, the mother of all harlots and traditions that you see, the synagogue of Satan. These are the days that we live in. Let her put away her harlotries from her sight and her adulteries from between her breasts, lest I strip her naked and expose her as in the day that she was born, and make her like a wilderness and set her up like a dry land and slay her with thirst. And this is the current state of the Messianic movement. And all I've been doing is saying, you know what? I'm not afraid to expose and to judge, because that's what exactly the message of Hosea is. Expose and judge. Expose and judge. And yes, there's a lot of pushback, but if you're looking to be redeemed from the nations, it's time to expose and judge, and bring charges against the traditions that have held you captive and bondage for so long. And we didn't unshackle ourselves from the institutionalized church just to shackle ourselves with a form of godliness, Messianic Judaism, yet it denies its power because it's built on the blasphemous religion of Judaism that said that Yahusha got his power from a shad, a demon. And we know that that's simply just not true. So Hosea has a message. He has a message, and he goes on to say, look, if you skip down to verse 6 of chapter 2, therefore, behold, I will hedge up your way with thorns and wall her in. She cannot find her paths. And we see that today. We've got all kinds of little groups together. We've got wisdoms in Torah, Talmudim, and they literally can't find their paths because what they're following is a leader that's leading them all the way to the temple steps and the sacrificial animal blood and the Levitical hierarchy. And I feel for these young neophytes that are coming into the movement and are just like grasping hold of these teachers that have been around for a decade or so, because they hold them up and think, oh, he's got to be the master Yoda, and it's like, come on, really? But that's what it's like. It's really, really sad. We need to wake up. Look what we see Hosea speaking of in the 14th verse as we go through. Therefore, behold, I will allure her and will bring her into the wilderness and speak comfort to her. When Yahweh brings us out into the wilderness, and we're going to go further into the wilderness as we outgrow this feast site. The feasts, especially tabernacles, when we come together, is a time when Yahweh speaks what? Comfort to his people. You can do this. Yes, it might be a little difficult at times, but yes, you can do this. He's speaking comfort to us. And he says, I will give her the vineyards from there and the valley of Achor as a door of hope. She shall sing there. You see, that's what people don't realize. But the tribulation is a door of hope when we sing the voice and the song of Moshe, the return to the covenant. It's a door of hope for us. A hope, because this world is passing away. My hope isn't in this world. My hope is that Yahusha is going to redeem us from the nations and return us back as the one head that we have appointed in this day and age. And we now continue on. Look at verse 16. And it shall be in that day. Remember, we've already seen the parallelisms and how Hosea spoke to the Melchizedek priesthood, 2 Peter, correct? The lower me, not my people, but you are now a people, the royal kingdom priesthood. And how are you a part of this royal kingdom priesthood? Is this limited to 750 before the Common Era, or now is it going to speak to you, new covenant believers? Because right here we're going to see, Hosea is going to tell you that in the future you're going to appoint one head, and I'm now going to spell it out to you. Now you're so silly, you're going to think that I'm talking about a picnic sheet and that you're going to have a pork roast. And he's going to spell it out to you, and he's going to say, no, what I'm going to spell out to you right now is that in the future, when you appoint one head, I'm going to now show you the symbols of the new covenant. And in Acts chapter 10, he's showing you the vision that Hosea prophesied right here in verse 16. And it shall come to pass in that day, says Yahweh, that you will call me my husband and no longer will call me my master. For I will take from her mouth the name of the Lord, and they shall be remembered by their name no more. In that day I will make a covenant with them. This is the new covenant, the Brit Hadashah, with the beasts of the field, and with the birds of the air, and with the creeping things of the ground. What? These are the symbols of the new covenant, the way of the nations, like Cornelius, of returning to the ways of the Melchizedek covenant Torah, once you acknowledged and appointed one head. That's why it shows up in Acts chapter 10. But the institutionalized church doesn't understand the prophecies of Hosea, so all of a sudden you've got a picnic sheet with a ham sandwich. Right? Wrong. How did you get that? Because you didn't read Hosea chapter 2, verse 16, understanding the symbols of the new covenant. Isn't this amazing as we go through and see the words of the prophet? So as we continue on, there is much to see in these verses and these opening verses. But look now, turn to chapter 3, and we can see just how far we have fallen. I mean, I grew up in England in the Episcopalian church, and come Easter time, you'd go off down the road and you'd be like, we used to sing it at school. Hot cross buns, we all want some hot cross bun. And where's that come from? Right here in chapter 3. Then Yahweh said to me, go again, love a woman who is loved by a lover and is now committing adultery, just like the love of Yahweh for the children of Israel, who took other gods and the love of the raisin cakes of the pagans. Where do we even get these silly hot cross buns from? Syncretism. Syncretism. It's the raisin cakes of the pagans, complete with the cross on top of it, and they roll them out even in bakeries today, right around Ishtar time. Look how far we have fallen into judgment in the nations. But now we have an eyes to see. This is our restoration. This is our restoration. Now we look and we go down further in chapter 4. How am I doing for time? We're on a time limit. Chapter 4 and verse 4. Now let no man contend or rebuke another, for your people are like those who contend with a priest. And today, what we're having is a bunch of contention with what? The Melchizedek Kohen Haggadah. We're having that. We're seeing as this return is coming, people are contending with the message of the priest. They're contending with the message of the priesthood. It's no different than in the days of Hosea. For your people are like those who contend with the priest. Therefore you shall stumble in the day. And you see them, people literally stumbling and bumbling all over themselves. They literally cannot understand the message. And then go on to make YouTube videos when they admit, I don't understand it, but let's condemn it. Well, that's foolery. You've just judged yourselves, Proverbs 18:13. And the prophet shall also stumble with you in the night. What does that mean? They have no prophetic vision. A prophet who stumbles in the night means you've got no prophetic vision. We've got to have the prophetic vision to understand the days that we live in. I will destroy your mother. My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. Lack of knowledge. No Melchizedek, no Torah understanding, because they're interpreting Torah through a Judaism paradigm of 5 books of Moses. Yet Abraham didn't know 5 books of Moses, and he kept Yahweh's Torah. So how can that be if Torah means 5 books of Moses? Maybe your paradigm and your prism is broken. But you know what? It's security for people. And to go outside of that security, that's too much of a stretch, because you'll lose friends, because you're starting to question on a serious level that jeopardizes people's property, personal property and bank accounts, and that puts you in dangerous territory. My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge, because you have rejected knowledge. I also will reject you from being priest for me. This is a serious message that we're bringing forth today. He has called you to be priests after the order of Melchizedek. But there's a consequence if you reject that message, because you have forgotten the Torah of Yahweh. Oh, you know what the Torah of Judaism is, but do you know what the Torah of Yahweh is? Because Abraham knew what that Torah was, and he never met a Levite. Abraham knew what that Torah was, and there was no 5 books of Moses. This is something where you would go, Selah, pause for reflection. Verse 7, the more they increased, population, are we at population explosion? What are we, 7 billion right now? The more they increased, the more they sinned against me. As a people, humanity, is this true of us today? The most wicked generation on the face of the planet. I will change their glory into shame. They eat up the sin of my people. They devour it. They devour it. They have set their heart on iniquity, and it shall be, like people, like priests, so I will punish them, in their ways, and reward them for their deeds. For they shall eat, but they shall not have enough. For they shall eat, but they shall not have enough. You can see the prophetic implications that Hosea is for us today. And now, with that in view, let's have a look at the warning of what we're seeing going on in the world today with these FEMA camps, because I want to just briefly touch on a little bit in this session about migration and famine. Because how do you move a whole nation into these designated FEMA regions? By implementing a tried and tested model that was prophetically pictured. We don't have time to go to it now, but you can go to your camps and read it. Turn to Bereshit, Genesis chapter 47, verse 13. Joseph deals with the famine, but prophetically, Joseph is a picture of, for the famine, Moshiach Naged. There's going to be another Joseph that's going to come, and he's going to what? Do exactly that same thing. It's called agricultural collectivism. That's what Stalin did, and that's what happened with Bob Geldof and in Ethiopia in 1985 is agricultural collectivism. And that's what we see in the pattern of Genesis chapter 47, verse 13, the infamous New World Order template for famine and migration. Because whilst you and I were donating money in 1985 or buying records and singing along with Bob Geldof and Bono, Feed the World, Do They Know It's Bloody Christmas Time, you know, Ethiopian Christians, yeah, they had a clue, but they certainly weren't celebrating. But yes, they did know it was Christmas time. But how many of you were communicated to you that they were Ethiopian Christians? Now, 30 years later, what's the migration policies of Ethiopia? It's full of what? Islam. You move them out, and then you move in what? The sword of Islam. And we know Jeremiah says that first of all Yahweh will send what? Fishermen. But if you don't hear the message, the gospel message, while you're fished out, you throw your net over the other side and you get in the 153. If you don't hear that message, now's the message of the fisherman. But if you don't get that message, he'll send you what? The hunters, Islam, the hunters, and they will hunt you out of the nations just like they did in Ethiopia, just like they did in Ethiopia in the late 90s. So we can see now that what happened was this template for migration. They bring forth their stage man, of course, Bob Geldof, that they just brought back out a couple of months ago, which made me dig into this and go, well, hang on a minute, something is going on. I smell a rat, and it's not the Boomtown rats. And did any of you get that joke? Yes? Okay, all right. See, that's the thing. Men capitalized, Bob Geldof capitalized on his new status as a global conscience. Why? To rescue his pop career. Because few people, Dan, myself, and a few others have heard of the Boomtown Rats, but most of you haven't. Because he was a failed pop star musician, but he capitalized upon what? The times, migration, starving Ethiopians to then find her new status as Sir Bob, and now being elevated by the globalists and the New World Order as their puppet to bring forth and move masses of people. But why Ethiopia? Very interesting, you may ask, because the background to Ethiopia, of course, comes to us from Shoftim, Judges, chapter 16, verse 17. Because we have a Nazarite, and who was that Nazarite? Who was the Nazarite we find in Judges, chapter 16, verse 17? Shimshon, Samson, and it says that he was a Nazarite, verse 19, and when he was dealing with Delilah, she made him sleep upon her knees, and she called for a man, and she caused him to shave off the 7 locks of his head. And she began to afflict him, and his strength went from him. He was carrying the kingly crown of the Nazarites, and this, of course, is where we get dreadlocks from. And this brings me into Ethiopia, because in Psalm chapter 68, verse 4, the King James Version says this: "Sing unto God, sing praises to his name, extol him that rideth upon the heavens, by his name Jah, and rejoice before him." Jah, Jah, God, head, Ras, creator, Tafari. Jah Rastafari. And that's what we get. Jah Rastafari, God is the head creator. And you may have heard Bob Marley, of course. I grew up, Jah Rastafari, ever living. We used to love that song, back in Brixton in South London. That was the song that you'd hear in all the music shop fronts, Due to that, we had the whole Rasta movement, that they were subjected. They were saying they worshipped the head creator, and the head creator was Jah, ever living. And how does this connect with Ethiopia? Because these Rastafari, they were actually strict Sabbath keepers. They followed the dietary requirements. They didn't drink alcohol, but they did believe that every herb was created for man to consume. It just so happened that some of it would, get caught on fire, and, they'd end up inhaling it, unlike Bill Clinton. But, this was the Rastafari movement. The main sources of Rastafari literature included, of course, the Holy Scripture. But with that, ancient Rasta records, such as the Kebrai Nust, the Fetra Nagust, the teachings of Haile Selassie. Now, Haile Selassie was the leader of Ethiopia in the 70s. And the Rastafarians in Ethiopia, they believed that he was going to deliver them. Many embraced in the Rastafari movement that he was the Mashiach, the Messiah, the anointed one. Now, the head of the Nungbagi tribe, or the order, was Emperor Haile Selassie. He was the faith's prophet whose genealogy they believed traced all the way to Melech David, King David. Well, how did they end up in Ethiopia? This is interesting, because they believed that Emperor Haile Selassie was the 225th king in the direct lineage of Melech Shlomo, King Solomon, the Solomonic dynasty, or as you'd say over here, dynasty. I grew up watching that show, Dynasty. I admit it, I confess, okay. But the Solomonic dynasty, he was the former ruling imperial house of the Ethiopian Empire that claimed patrilineal descent from Melech Shlomo, King Solomon, the king of Israel, and of course, Queen Sheba. And this was the culture that was going on in Ethiopia. They loved the scriptures. They were keeping the Sabbaths. They were keeping the dietary requirements. They were following and seeking after Jah Rastafari, God, the head creator. Yes, there was a sect of the Rastafaris that believed that Haile Selassie was going to deliver them from oppression and that he was the Mashiach, but not all Rastafarians believed that. There was a strong Christian movement going on in Ethiopia, in the Horn of Africa. And what have we got to do whenever there's a strong movement of the people of Yah? We got to bring in the Bolsheviks, the Jewish synagogue of Satan, and we've got to crush them. We got to enslave them, and we've got to capitalize, and then we got to move them, imprison them, and then move in another population, take the resources, and enslave them. And that is the pattern that we see that happened. I'm going to expose that to you, explain that to you, and then I'm going to finish up, again, wrapping this all up and tying it up through the prophetic message of Hosea, because this speaks to the FEMA regions in the United States, and that is why Bob Geldof was brought out on Brexit. So bear with me, because this is a very important message today, because I believe Yahweh is going to bring the whole house of Israel together. And after we get back from Sukkot, we're going to go into a little bit more of where the tribes of Israel are in these days. If you're spending this much time telling me that the Jews are not the Jews, but they're the sons of Gomer, they are in fact Ashkenazi imposters, then where are the real Jews, and what on earth is going on with Israel? Because we understand, yeah, we're northern Israel, exiled in the nations, one from a town, two from a city. But if Judah isn't Judah, then where the hell is Judah? Right? Right? Right, exactly. Well, bear with me, be patient, because as we can see now, the Solomonic dynasty, of course, with Melech, Shlomo, and Queen Sheba, according to the tradition, Queen Sheba gave birth to Menelik the first, after her biblically described visit to Solomon in Jerusalem. Now, beginning in Jamaica, and we have to understand, I was very shocked when I came to America of the racial discord, because I grew up in a country where there's a heavy Jamaican influence. In fact, when in the 90s, the only place that I could afford to live in London was Brixton, which was the Jamaican community. And there was me and, a couple dozen white guys that risked life and limb to live there. But I really enjoyed the culture. It was a great price point for me. So I was like, I'm going to live in Brixton. And, in the 80s and 90s, we had the Brixton riots and whatnot, but I love the culture, I love the people, and the difference with the black community in England and the black community in America is that the black community in England as a whole were invited to England. They came from Jamaican plantations, yes, but they were given British citizenship and they were invited. So there wasn't the racial tension. Was there racism? Yes, but there wasn't this underlying vexing that you have and fermentation that the New World Order globalists are capitalizing on today, because in America, the black population was not invited here, were they? They were enslaved. Deuteronomy will talk about that, in slave ships and brought over. So there's a difference. So it was very different from me as an Englishman coming over here. That I registered and I could see that wound. There's a deep wound in this country, a deep wound, because that needs to be healed. And the only way that's going to be healed is by the truth being told and the restoration of all Israel, the multicolored coat of Joseph. And we're right at that point. And that's why the globalists right now are starting to stoke those fires of fermentation. Because if we can be racially divided, then guess what? We won't realize who the real slaves slave masters are, because they don't care what color your skin is. They're just looking to enslave us, right? Oh yeah, it's not in chains and in ships today, but the slave masters, they will enslave you in the system, the debt, the banking. They'll have you and they'll have me. It doesn't matter. So if they can have us divided, they can continue to enslave us. But we know we come together because we are Yahweh's people. And that's what I love about Yahusha. He healed leprosy. And leprosy right there, it has all the pigmentation colors of mankind. Because that's what Yahusha does. Because a leper, their skin would turn red. And then, you know what, it would begin to pus and it would turn yellow. And then it would turn black. And then it could turn white. You see, all the pigmentation colors of Israel, Yahusha heals. Because we are Israel. And that is the message of restoration. You know, yes, the Catholic Church made him out to look like Barry Gibb. We know he didn't look like Barry Gibb, for crying out loud. Right? My goodness. But we can see right here, I like a little bit of Barry Gibb, though, I've got to tell you. Back to Jamaica in the 1930s, the Rastafari movement perceived Haile Selassie as the messianic figure that would lead the future golden age of eternal shalom. But it didn't happen. It didn't happen. And this brings me to our teaching about specifically Ethiopia in 1975, because we had the overthrow in 1975 of Haile Selassie's imperial regime. You see, Ethiopia illustrates the close coordination of feeding programs with military migration objectives. And if we don't understand the close association today, this is my warning to you, if we don't understand the close association today with feeding programs and military objectives, you will and I will get caught up in FEMA camp relocation. So we need to expose it through Scripture. That's why I chose the book of Hosea, because I don't want to be all out here. I want us to be able to tie it and connect it back to Israel in exile. And that's why the Scripture is our safe point. But Ethiopia illustrates that. Live Aid 1985. We had 70 million. Think about this. This was in 1985. 70 million pounds sterling, British pounds, 70 million raised throughout that song. We are the world. Right? We are the world. It should have been, we are the new world order. Da, 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 da. Right? Wrong. But really, 70 million British pounds, Live Aid. It was a military campaign masquerading as a humanitarian effort. A military campaign. So, if they did it then, are they going to do it now? We have the Scriptures that will point us and direct us. Because we know Haile Selassie wasn't the real Mashiach, we know who the real Mashiach is. But because we know Israel was about to go down the tubes as a society in 750 to 722 before the Common Era, we can read Hosea's message today and know we are Israel in restoration. We need to be able to look at the Scriptures and see it full circle. And when he says that famine is going to come, then we need to look at these words, we need to meditate on these things, and we need to be prepared, because this is the day and the age that we live in. And I'll go just a few more, maybe 10 more minutes, because I know we're on a time limit here. But it was a military campaign masquerading as humanitarian effort. I mean, I look back on that and I go, well, how could I have known that at the time? I mean, I'm embarrassed to say this, but I mean, I was 14 years old at Live Aid going around picking mushrooms, and I wasn't making mushroom soup. But that's what I was doing with all my little 14-year-old friends. I mean, I can't believe my mum would just let me go. But that was little Matthew, or 14-year-old, we are the world, all right, where's the mushrooms, you know, and we would go mushroom picking at the concert. I remember it clearly. How could have I even understood with that mindset to be in that much slavery to my senses, the carnality that was manifest in me, to know what was going on? To quote Charles Begay, he said this: "It will never be known what act of cowardice has been motivated by the fear of not looking sufficiently progressive." This is an admonishment to our generation. I'll repeat that to you. It's a great quote. Charles Begay. It will never be known what acts of cowardice have been motivated by the fear of not looking sufficiently progressive. Well, you're not progressive. You don't look progressive enough. So people then, they diminish who they are because of the establishment, and they act like cowards. Well, that's not a very progressive kind of thought, Dan, that you would think about that group of people that way and call that unrighteousness. So then somebody would say, oh yeah, you're right. So this is cowardice. No, we need to stand up and speak the truth. Live Aid was this showbiz orgy put on by despicable people living despicable lifestyles, and they scammed £70 million from us all for military objectives masquerading as humanitarian efforts. It was the fashionable pop culture Illuminati. What were they doing? They were seeking their own promised land. You see, S.A.Town, what's up is down, what's black is white. We're looking for the promised land. You don't think the globalists are looking for the promised land? Of course, they were looking for their own promised land. And where were they looking for that promised land? Just like Bill Clinton was looking for that promised land in Mogadishu. They were looking for the promised land on the Horn of Africa. Bob Geldof, well, he was their prophesied Messiah. The New World Order's prophesied Messiah was Bob Geldof, the Mashiach of the moment in 1985. That's when they all came out to worship him. Even the Queen has knighted him. Sir Bob knighted him, worshipping him after the Luciferic order of knighthood. This is the same Bob Geldof, bear in mind, that imported 100 copies of Mao's Little Red Book directly from the Viet Cong into Ireland in the 1970s. He imported 100 copies directly from the Viet Cong into Ireland in the 1970s at the height of the Vietnam War. So it kind of tells you who his allegiance is to, does it not? And he got caught doing that. Thousands of Western aid workers and journalists would fly into the impoverished Horn of Africa, and then what would they do? Thousands of them. They were then forced to exchange money into local currency at such high rates it fueled the government's war machine. Then aid is used to tempt starving Christian villagers into Bolshevik camps, and with hundreds of thousands deported, with more camps in the south. And there was a 1 in 6 mortality rate in Ethiopia because of Band-Aid. There was only one organization out of all of the organizations that went into Ethiopia, and it was a French organization called Médecins Sans Frontières, or our equivalent of Doctors Without Borders. They were the only corporation, the French Doctors Without Borders, Médecins Sans Frontières, after witnessing 6,000 children die in a camp. Despite there being enough food in the entire camp, they were booted out of the country when they brought that up. There was enough food in the camp, yet 6,000 children starved to death. It's crazy. All the usual suspects, of course, were present in 1985. And who are the usual suspects? Well, all these Western donor governments. The World Bank, were they involved in Band-Aid and Feed the World? Of course they were. The IMF, the UN, UNICEF, the Red Cross, Save the Children, and of course the American Doctors Without Borders. Are they going to be involved in the relocation across this nation? You better believe it. When you start seeing the World Bank, IMF, UN, UNICEF, and the Red Cross signs coming up, offering you vaccinations, offering you food, MRE meals, and come into our camps and we'll take care of you. Come and step onto this truck. We'll get you into a safe environment because there's been a toxic spill or there's been some sarin gas in this area. We need to relocate you to another area. Then you better believe that the masses are going to jump on those trucks, right? All the way. And this is the world that we're living in. And this was the test model that they rolled out 30 years ago in preparation for what they've been planning for, I believe, the days that you and I live in today. So I see this, and when they brought out Geldof this year, everything clicked in my mind. Everything clicked when I was reading the scriptures. I said, this is an important message. This is a little bit off topic and off base on what I would normally do. But we're coming together at a feast site, and I believe people are coming together because they have a heart to see. We need to get out of the cities. We need to be prepared, and we need to be prepared for the days that we live in. So I'm just going to speak it, and you guys discern whether this is for us today or not. Because famine was the consequence, what? Of a move of God. That's what they said. It was a famine of biblical proportions. Well, there was no parting of the Red Sea. There was no plagues. So, no, it wasn't a famine of biblical proportion. It was a famine because of the consequences of unresolved armed conflicts that were going on in Ethiopia. There was a new communist government that was brought in after they got rid of Haile Selassie, and it was called the Communist Dirge. The Communist Dirge. You see, there were then, because of this new Communist Dirge, there were opposition groups in Ethiopia. There were the Eritrean and Tigrian forces who lived upon the flat plateaued area where 92% of the Christian population lived. And they wanted to move that population out of that area, that Christian population, and get them into the communist, Bolshevik government-controlled areas. So, when all of the international money came forth and they bought up all this grain and they shipped the grain over to Ethiopia, it went into the city of Addis Ababa. The port of Addis Ababa, and that's where all the grain went. And guess who had that area? The Bolshevik communists. So all the food was brought into that port. It didn't go to the plateau. So anybody that wanted to be fed, then they had to they would move them and migrate them down into that area right there at the port area. And this all happened right under our very noses as we were getting out our checkbooks, buying those records, and feeding a powerful multinational government and a powerful weapon. And this is what would happen. The government forces dwell on the main north-south highways and the harbor cities, including Addis Ababa. And you and I need to look at the roads, the freeways, and the highways around our area and understand that the government are going to use those main northern and southerly lines and those main eastern and westerly lines, and they're going to use those main port cities. Okay, so if you live near those areas, you need to really think about what you're doing, because those are going to be so easily to lock up in a very quick moment, and then you're stuck. So you really need to think about that, especially in light of the prophecy in Genesis chapter 47 where Joseph deals with the famine. The government strategy revolved around drawing hungry peasants into the urban feeding centers, government-run feeding centers. International aid donors provided strictly through government channels. Oh yeah, you can give, But when you give, you're going to have to go through the Bolshevik government channels, and then they would disperse, leaving 5 to 10 million starving people on the wrong side of the battle lines. This is outrageous. And Bob Geldof orchestrated all of this. All of this. Less than 3% of famine victims, which was due to the Stalinist agricultural practices, which was, of course, government manufactured, were located in government camps where 100% of the Live Aid money was funneled to where 3% of the population was. 100% of the Live Aid money was funneled to where 3% of the population. This shows you, how could so many billions, I'm talking billions of people, be deceived? Billions. All over the world. We're all singing songs. And that is even worse today, that you and I are even having this conversation, is a testimony to what the Mashiach has done in your lives, that you've even got the eyes to see and the ears to hear. Less than 5% of the population were being fed in the plateau. 1,500 people a day were dying in the rural populations, all under the banner of Live Aid. All under the banner of Live Aid. The government's refusal to allow airdrops of food into rural areas controlled by the people. £70 million sterling in 1985 funneled to the Bolshevik government feeding centers. Celebrities, well, yeah, you had Bono and Bob Geldof, and all of these celebrities would go over to Ethiopia. Do you think that they were taken to the plateau where 97% of the population was starving? No, they were taken to the government feeding centers in the urban areas. Western media, where were they taken? To the 3%, to the government feeding centers in the urban areas, whilst looking the other way as military bomb truck convoys moving into the rural areas and zones from Sudan, because the 97% of the population, they didn't want, they would rather die or risk the 1,000-mile trek to Sudan to try and get out of the country and get fed than go down into the feeding centers. They would rather trek it. And that's what you and I need to have the mindset. Are you going to go down into the feeding centers? Or are you going to just put on your go bag, which we'll be talking about tomorrow, and ready just to hoof it? I mean, these trailers are nice and everything, and these RVs are nice, but in an EMP, well, computer, goodbye. I mean, you'll be tearing the side of it with an axe, you know. If it's made of wood, I don't think any of them are made with wood nowadays, are they? Well, a few of them. Tear off those wood floors. But the objective with this whole thing was to catch or contain mobile populations in secured areas. And this is a military strategy that's going to be implemented on an unsuspected population, And the only way they could escape was to make a 3 to 6 week journey all the way into the Sudan. Because what we're going to see, closing with this, and we'll pick up later tomorrow, more in Hosea and more on this Ethiopian escapade, we need to be careful, because they're going to use food as a weapon, and Washington was the quartermaster. And we need to be very wary as we're coming into election time. They're going to use food as a weapon. And again, Washington will be the quartermaster. Maybe they'll roll out Bob Geldof again. or maybe they'll roll out somebody else. Could be the next president, we don't know. But we need a people that are prepared. Just as Hoshea spoke to Israel, we are now not Israel that is going down the last swirls of the drain, but we are Israel that is coming up from the nations, being restored to glory, because we have made the decision to appoint one head. And we are now called to be that priest, called to be that prophetic voice, not to stumble around like a prophet without vision in the night, with no clear prophetic vision, but to give the prophetic vision, to your communities, to help people so they don't make the same mistakes of what the communities made in Ethiopia in the 1980s. Yahweh has a word for us, and I believe that word is for us to prepare and to be as wise as serpents and as harmless as doves, because we live in a very, very perilous times. But I have a hope and a glory that is from above, and I know and I am secure that he is doing a mighty work in his people, and it's exciting that he's bringing forth the revelation to us that we can see these things. We can see what's going on, because I believe that there are so many more fish to be caught in that net, but you don't want to be ensnared in the wrong net, because you need to be casting the net over the other side to bring in the multitudes. And right now, if they don't want to hear the message that you're speaking, then cast it on another side, go into another community, and you know what? It might be time for you to return to those Christian communities and speak this message. No longer a message of Torah terrorism, but a message of Melchizedek covenant, Torah redemption, and hope. Amen. Amen.